Here from all over the United States, from as far as London and South Africa even. So welcome to you all. And before I introduce our speaker, just a little bit of housekeeping because this is Zoom and it has its own little rules. First of all, on timing, our speaker will talk for about 40 minutes and we are going to save time for a Q&A session. 15, 20 minutes, depending on how many we have. And that's going to be handled via the chat function. And as Gay Ellen said, this talk is being recorded. It will be broadcast at a later date on the Needham cable channel. So it's really just a great pleasure to be able to introduce you to Dr. Gil Brodsky, who is a physician and a very long time Needham resident, who will share the brave new world of DNA testing and his story, kind of just what happens after you spit into that tube. And now, Gil. Oh, you need to unmute.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you very much, Sue, for the introduction. And thank you, Gay Ellen and the Needham Library Foundation for inviting me today. Let me see if I can. Okay, everybody see the intro slide on the screen there? We all set? Good. So I'm going to talk today about those DNA test kits that you get, that you see ads for at this point all over the internet. You see them on the internet, you see ads on TV, you see ads in newspapers, and basically they're selling you a product. They're saying, get this for various reasons. Originally it was for finding your ethnicity. Now it's also for finding health traits and things like that. We'll talk about all of those things. And I would imagine that many of you out there have taken either an Ancestry DNA or 23andMe or one of the other tests. Some of you are considering doing it. Some of you might even have a test kit sitting on your kitchen shelf, which you haven't decided to do yet. Okay, I am going to talk briefly today. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to do a little bit of the basic biology, explaining how this DNA testing works. How do these companies know or find out the things that they find out or purport to know about you? Specifically, where do you come from? What is your heritage geographically, ethnically, biologically, et cetera? Whoops, sorry. How do they find your family members? Tell you, oh, gee, we found somebody who we think is your uncle. Also, they talk about certain traits. They can predict whether you'll be able to taste things that are bitter or salty and what your earlobes look like, etc. And also they tell you what some of your health risks are or may not be. A tiny bit about other trends, and then I'm going to spend a considerable amount of time talking about my own story of when I took the test and what I found out and where it's taken me. Okay, basically, bear with me. This is a very quick review of your high school or biology 101 in college genetics. I'm going to try to do this very quickly. Basically, quote, we are our DNA. It's not entirely that. Obviously, nature has a considerable role, but nurture also does as well. But as far as the DNA goes, our body is made up of trillions of cells. Within each cell, other than red blood cells, is the nucleus. And the nucleus contains chromosomes, and the DNA is arranged on those chromosomes. In humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. And by pairs, I mean you get one of each chromosome, 1, 2, all the way through 22 from your father and one each from your mother. And those are, and then of course, if you are a female, you have 2 X chromosomes. If you're a male, you have 1 X and 1 Y chromosomes. Now, the DNA molecule by itself it's a rather remarkable molecule. You're all familiar, I think, with this double helix arrangement. And basically this double spiral staircase is made up, sticking in from the staircases are side groups, as they're called, of the molecule, of what are either called bases or nucleotides. And there are only 4 of them, which are called A, C, G, and T. And if you look at on any one strand of the 2 strands, if there's an A on one side, it's matched up with a C on the other. If there's a G on one side, it's matched up with a T on the other. And when cells undergo mitosis and duplicate, what happens is all of the DNA literally unzips along this helix, and then each strand, it says, okay, here's an A, go find a C. Here's a T, go find a G. And that's how DNA replicates itself. Now, in the human genome, there are about 3 billion base pairs spread out on these 23 chromosomes. And what they do is they are arranged. How does this DNA work? Well, the DNA is arranged in triplets. They're not physically arranged in triplets. It's just you go reading along as these 3-letter words. Now, if there's 4 possibilities, then you can get 64, 4 times 4 times 4 3-letter words. And each of those codes for an amino acid. So for instance, a GAT would code for asparagine, which is one of, aspartic acid, which is one of the amino acids. And then this codes for the proteins. The proteins make up the structure of your body, and they also make up all of the metabolic machinery in your body. Now, it's interesting, we found that if you look at DNA among individuals, human individuals, we are 99.9% identical. So for all of what's been talked about over history and currently about differences in human beings, it's important to stress that every one of us, as far as our DNA goes, is 99.9% identical. Now, that leaves a difference of 0.1%, but if you look at that with a total of 30 billion, that still means that there are 3 million places along this genome that are different between individuals. And those differences in those 3 million places are what makes each of us different from each other. Now, there's a couple of things I'm going to talk about. Each one of those variables is a different place, is referred to as a single nucleotide polymorphism. Nucleotide is another word for those bases, A, C, G, or T. Polymorphism is a fancy way of saying a difference. And there's a single one looking at a single place. And those are referred to as SNPs. Now, some SNPs make no difference at all. Some SNPs do make a difference, but actually many of them don't, because they either are in places where the DNA is not actually coded, so-called junk DNA, and some changes don't make any difference at all. So for instance, GGG and GGA both code for a glycine. So even though the DNA is different, the proteins that they make are the same. Now, when the companies, here's a little sort of a diagram of what those 23 chromosomes might look like. When they do the DNA testing, what they do is they look for thousands of known SNPs, actually probably hundreds of thousands. These companies are very secretive about the number and which of SNPs and which SNPs that they use. The other thing that's important to know is that you inherit whole chromosomes or whole chunks of chromosomes from each parent. So so what's important is that those lengths of chromosomes that you might have in common with other people are related to the fact that you got a whole chunk of chromosome 1 or any of the chromosomes from your parents, who indeed in turn got them from their parents. So those chunks of chromosomes, those segments, are important also in looking at relationships, and we'll talk about that later. And those lengths are measured in centimorgans. Dr. Morgan was a geneticist in the early 20th century. Okay, I think I was going to stop for questions here, but I think if people have questions about that, they can post them, and we can go to that later, having finished our little biology recap here. Okay, so the thing that the companies advertised most in the past is this idea of where did I come from? This is so that people can, quote, explore their heritage. And you're probably familiar with the ad on TV of somebody, a guy dressed in lederhosen saying, oh, my parents, my ancestors came from Germany. And then I sent in the test and whoops, they're not from Germany at all. They're from Scotland, and now he's wearing a kilt. So how do they do that? And the answer is that there are certain SNPs which are more prevalent among different populations. So say you look at a specific address on chromosome 13, and you find out that 99% of the world's population has an A there. But the other 1%, say, have a T there. And then you look and you realize that that 1% are people who are of Korean ancestry. And you can do the same thing all over the place. You look at a different SNP, and that shows you people of South Asian ancestry, or others that will show that maybe something on chromosome 12 that points to ancestry in East or West Africa. Now, one SNP does not a heritage make, but if you find that the populations are identified by 50 distinct SNPs, and you look at the testing of an individual, and that person has 48 of those 50 SNPs, then chances are that he is from that place where things are. Putting that all together, they can give you an estimate of where your ancestors came from. So when they do that, if they tell you you are 100% something or other, that's pretty reliable. If they tell you that you're 50% Iberian and 50% English, say, that's fairly reliable too. And same thing with 25%, even down to an eighth, 12% or so. When the numbers start getting small in the 1 to 3% range, then that's not nearly as reliable as in terms of that. In fact, when I first got my DNA results, it said that I was 1% Scandinavian. Actually Finnish. And then I got a message from them about 6 months later saying, you know, that thing that said we thought you were 1% Finnish, ignore that. You're really 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. Okay. The other thing to note is that the prediction of this ancestry is only as good as the data and database that they have. So if they have a lot of people from the same area reliably, then it will be more reliable, their predictions. But of something, for instance, like looking at Native American heritage, not that many relatively Native Americans have done commercial DNA testing. So to be able to predict, well, we think you are 50% Iroquois and 50% Cherokee, say, that is much less reliable because they have less data in their database to work with. Okay, moving on to family members. How do they'll send you an email. They send me emails every 2 weeks saying, we have found new relatives, and here's what we think your relation to that relative is. So here's a little cartoon that's a very flattering picture of myself. And of course, being me, by definition, I have 100% of DNA that I share with myself. So my mother and father, since I got half of my chromosomes from dad and half of the chromosomes from mom, I will share 50% of the DNA. Now, obviously, I said before, everybody shares 99.9%, but we're talking about of these predicted variations that you can measure. So I share 50% of their DNA, but you measure that by these SNPs and by these segments in centimorgans. My sister or brother, full SIB, I would also share 50%. If I have an uncle or an aunt who is a SIB of one of my parents, 50% that they share with him and 50% that I share with dad, so that's 25%. And then a cousin, you can guess, that would be 12.5%. Now these numbers are not exact. It's in the range. So a first cousin might have as low as maybe 11% and as high as 14%. Of course, any children that I have would have 50%. Now, suppose one of my parents also had children with a different partner. Say, mom and dad got divorced, mom got remarried, they had other children. I don't know upfront how much I share with this stranger, so to speak, of a stepdad, but if they have a child, that half SIB and I, since we share the same mother, we will share 25% of the DNA. Now, as we move along with this, here's me and the big orange thing. They can predict out to like as many as third to fifth cousins what percentage of these DNA you would share. And the other thing that's important is how many identical segments of DNA they find and how long those segments are on the chromosome measured in centimorgans. Now, the next thing they'll do, this is an extra feed to send in for the traits and health. Some terminology here, the actual DNA sequence is referred to as your genotype. Your physical trait or metabolic trait is your phenotype. And your genotypes can predict the phenotypes. Now, sometimes that is really one single change in one gene can predict that. So for instance, it's only one base pair on the gene for hemoglobin, which will predict that somebody will have sickle cell disease. And it's only one gene, for instance, that determines whether a certain type of chemical tastes bitter to you or you can't taste at all. Similarly, there's mostly one gene that they found which can determine whether, like me, you can drink 2 cups of coffee after dinner and still just fall right to sleep later. Or like my wife, Margie, she can't drink a cup of coffee after 2 p.m. because she'll have the jitters all night and not be able to fall asleep. Now, there are other genes, things which are polygenic. We know, for instance, that height is inherited. Everybody knows that tall people tend to have tall children. But when they look at the genes that predict for that, there are at least 60 different genes that make a difference in your height. So here is what they will send to you in some of your reports: diabetes, celiac disease, BRCA, etc. And they can even tell you whether you have a variant which puts you at risk for Alzheimer's disease. Now, if you're thinking of doing this doing these tests because of health risks, hey, an uncle of mine developed Alzheimer's disease, am I at risk? I would say use these seriously only as a guideline. I know, for instance, there was a woman whose mother and aunt had breast cancer, and she told me she sent off her test to 23andMe, and they told her she doesn't have BRCA. So she says, I'm all set now, I don't need to keep going for mammograms. And no, 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 no. The testing only tests for the most common variants. And even BRCA doesn't predict even for all cases of genetically correlated breast cancer. And certainly there's a lot of breast cancer which isn't genetically predicted. This is getting better, but I would say if you are concerned about any genetic risks because of a family history, please check with your doctor or see a board or see a board certified medical geneticist. There are a few other things that you might have heard of in the headlines. They had DNA from the Golden State Killer that they found on the scene, et cetera. He didn't match up in a database. He hadn't personally sent his DNA in for testing, but several of his family members did. And based on the fact that they were able to say that these people were closely related based on the way we determined the relationships before to the killer, they were able to track him down and arrest him. Also, interestingly, one of the earliest DNA testing sites was actually looking at African Americans to look for their relationship with regard to their heritage in Africa, and actually use that information for some social activism. A very interesting topic, which I certainly don't have any time to talk about further today. One of the things that you hear about is the fact that people who get their DNA results find out something unexpected. Danny Shapiro, you can see in the book cover on the left, wrote this best-selling book called Inheritance, in which she found out that her father was not her biological father and what she went through in terms of all of that. It is estimated that 2 to 4% of people might find out that, quote, your father isn't who you thought it was. The term is misattributed paternity. The Telegraph in England, which is kind of the London equivalent of the New York Post, puts that estimate as high as 10%. And of course, you've heard stories about what I refer to as serial inseminators, doctors who use their own sperm in fertility clinics and have fathered dozens of children without having told any of the women or the families that he was doing this. The most infamous case is of a Dr. Klein, an OBGYN who ran a fertility clinic in Indianapolis. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my own family story now. So my parents, Nathan Brodsky, who was from Philadelphia, and Bibi Brodsky from Burlington, New Jersey, just a short hop across the Delaware River, met and fell in love and got married in 1938. They set out to have a family. They were hoping to have a reasonably large family, but they went through infertility for 9 years. And finally, my sister Joy was born in 1948. They were so thrilled. That's one of the reasons why they named her Joy, after years of trying and not being able to have a baby. And then 3 years later, I came along. Very nice little nuclear family there, great, happy story. And then something happened. Well, as we were growing up, my sister and I were very different. We didn't look alike at all. We had very different personalities. I was the very good kid who did everything that I was told. Joy was an absolute rebel. I was fortunately very good academically at school. Joy struggled a lot. I even remember in 6th grade, when I was back in 3rd grade, I was doing her math homework for her. And when we grew up, I went to college, medical school, practicing pathologist, and Joy never really held down a job in her life. Back in 1982, on Thanksgiving, we invited a cousin of mine who was also living in Boston at the time to Thanksgiving dinner. And over the course of that dinner, we were talking about the fact that my sister and I were so different. And she said, well, don't you think that the adoption had something to do with that? And I said, the what? And she turned about as white as the circles and squares on this page, realizing that she had just spilled a secret. She said, you mean you didn't know that your sister was adopted? I said, no, and I'm sure that Joy doesn't know that either. And she said, well, gee, I think all of the other cousins in our family knew that. And having talked with others, I found out that later that most of the cousins did know that. So I was, however, and then 7 years later, actually, my sister found out herself by accident. These secrets always are sort of spilled and revealed under accidental circumstances. My sister found out that she had been adopted, and she called me up and said, Gil, I have something to tell you. Are you sitting down? And she said, I found out I was adopted. And I said, I know. I couldn't lie to her and tell and hold on to the secret. This needed to be out in the open. And I explained why I hadn't told her over those past 7 years. It was something that I felt was not my secret. I didn't own it to reveal to her. That was something that my parents had held, and it was not up to me to break that. Frankly, I was very relieved at the time not to have that burden of that secret anymore. So here I was as the miracle baby. My mother died in 2002, and my father in 2004, and my sister in 2016. Last year, in 2018, my wife Margie said that she was interested in buying one of these kits that she had seen advertised on TV. She said, you know, I have such pale skin and blue eyes. I don't think I can be entirely Ashkenazi Jewish. There must be some Irish blood in there somewhere. So I told her on Mother's Day, I said, I bought you a present. I got you one of those kits so you can find out about this. And also I said, as long as you got one, I got one for myself. I was kind of interested in exploring some additional, trying to locate some additional family members on my mother's side that I didn't really know about. So we spat into the kits together, sealed up the boxes and sent them away to Ancestry DNA. In a couple of weeks, the results come back. And it said basically I was, at the time it said I was 98% European Jewish with some extra things. Like I said, the 1% Finnish thrown in, but later it was revised to 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. And Margie got the same thing. So here's a spoiler alert that there are indeed pale-skinned and dark-skinned, blue-eyed and brown-eyed Ashkenazi Jews. Okay. Oh, sorry. So then, a few days after I got my DNA results, I got an email message that came through Ancestry. And I know the person who sent me that message is in the crowd today. She said, hello, Gilbert. We show as close relatives on Ancestry DNA. I said, okay, maybe, you know, good, maybe I found somebody. Close, that's an interesting question. A number of us learned of our connection after testing on this site and others. We had parents living in or near the Philadelphia area. Yeah, I'm from Philadelphia. This is intriguing. Glad to share this information with you. Please let me know if you're interested in talking. And a couple of days later, I get another email from somebody else with you know, similar tantalizing information. And it took a while before I finally got around to checking back with these people. But finally, in 2018, on Father's Day, of all days, I finally after we had finished our picnic and we had sent everybody home, I said to Margie, I just got to make a few phone calls, and then we'll come down and join you. So 3 hours later, I came back with the results of what I learned on that phone call. And what I found out was I was donor conceived. The father who had raised me was not actually my biological father. I said, okay. Thinking back on that, that actually made sense to me. Here it was, my parents had struggled with infertility for years. They adopted my older sister, keeping that a secret. And they had also decided they wanted another child. And to think that after 13 years, all of a sudden now, they were able to conceive a baby, that makes less sense, that miracle, than the fact that I was donor conceived. So that's interesting. So who was the donor? Well, it turns out that my donor was a fertility expert in Philadelphia. And he was indeed a pioneer in the field of male infertility. Now, interestingly, if you look at the history, the concept of male infertility didn't even exist until the late 40s, 1950s. It was always thought that if a couple couldn't have a baby, it was the mother's fault. And that wasn't the case then, it isn't now. My mother recounted when she was alive how much she went through many infertility workups, many of which were painful or uncomfortable, and they, quote, never found anything wrong. And of course there was never anything wrong, because the problem was that my father could not produce sperm. So she also said, well, she said, it turns out, this person I was talking to that she said, okay, you and I are half brother and half sister. I said, wow, great to meet you, sister. And actually, I had looked her up on Facebook beforehand, and the moment I saw her picture, her profile picture on Facebook, I said, oh my God, that's my sister. We look like brother and sister. She said, but wait, there's more. He had fathered others. And I said, okay, really? Others, how many? Well, he did a lot of this. Apparently, he worked through a network of OBGYNs in the Philadelphia area, and he would provide them with the semen for artificial insemination for people there. And he apparently used his own sperm many times. We don't know whether the OBGYNs he was working with had any idea that he was doing this, or whether he was using house staff, medical house staff, and medical students, as it was mostly done at the time. So I said, how many? So she says, well, you're number 30. I said, okay. So who are these people? She says, well, I can introduce you to them. We actually have a private Facebook group. So log on to that, and you can, I'll introduce you, and you can introduce yourself. So I look at these pictures of the Sibs, and we do look a lot alike. The thing that I focus on is the mouth. I'll show you a group photo later. Most family group photos, you'll see big toothy smiles. Most of us in the family, not everybody, but most of us have what I call a very untoothy closed mouth smile. We do keep growing. In the almost 2.5 years since then, we have gone from 30 to 50. We always seem to have an even match of brothers and sisters, 25 each at this point. Everybody is from greater Philadelphia area and South Jersey. We consider ourselves a very distinguished group. We have 11 physicians, 6 university professors, 4 people in the in other allied medical professions, several entrepreneurs, accountants, a couple of lawyers. About 3/4 of us, I haven't done an exact count, were raised Jewish. I think that's because of the population, probably of the OBGYNs at the time, all of the OBGYNs that we know of that my donor father worked with were Jewish, so they probably had a Jewish clientele. This went on for a long time. The oldest in the group is 75, it might be up to 76 now, and the youngest that we know of turned 50 just this past year. So for 25 years, he was doing these shenanigans. Most of us have embraced our family relationship. A few people have said, I don't want anything to do with this, but they have been in the minority. We've actually held reunions. The first one was in 2017, before I knew that I was part of this group. I was down there with 17 others in DC in 2018, and 26 of us got together in Philadelphia last year. Unfortunately, this year, for pandemic reasons, obviously, we could not get together. We're keeping our fingers crossed that by June of 2021, we can indeed get together again in Philadelphia. Here's the picture from last year's reunion. We've got the oldest seated down here on the far right, going down, and then the youngest of the people who were there that day in the upper left. Here am I in the middle here. There is a, I'm sitting between two sibs who are also physicians. My sister Dina here, who is who is in the people watching today. Whoops, sorry. Is also a physician living in New York, and the brother here is a physician in Texas. I was born in March 1951. She was in February 51. Sorry, I keep accidentally going down. And then the brother on my right is was born in April of 1951. So just, you know, you find very strange coincidences in the family. We find a lot of things that are similar among the sibs. One of the interesting things is that one of the things that led my biological father to scientific prominence was his use of testicular biopsy to evaluate male infertility. Interestingly, as a pathologist, one of my jobs is to look at biopsies, and one of my specialties was reading testicular biopsies. It was a sort of thing, they don't do them, they rarely do these now, but they were done very much through about the 90s. When one of the residents would have a case of a testicular biopsy at the Brigham where I used to work, they would take it to the staff pathologist, and they often say, gee, this is not one of the things, I don't, take this to Brodsky, he really likes these kind of cases. So this is this just a strange coincidence, you know, that I'm following in my biological's footsteps, or is there something truly karmic about it? I don't know. So what have I learned from all of this, lessons that I've taken from this? The first is no more family secrets. Back in the days when they were doing these artificial inseminations, the line that was always told to the parents was, don't tell anybody. Nobody will ever know. Nobody will ever find out. These days, given genetic testing, given the internet, et cetera, it is impossible, basically, to keep family secrets. I think of secrets as dandelions. No matter how well you tend your lawn to keep it perfectly grassy, a few dandelions will show up here and there at the worst place and time. The other thing is that infertility was and still is an underappreciated issue. My parents struggled with it. The parents of all of my half-sibs struggled with it. And it's still something that's a problem today. I would say there are three medical things that that you would never talk about with other people: cancer, mental health, and infertility. We've gone away from that in cancer, fortunately. But mental health and infertility are still two things that tend to be associated with shame, and people don't want to talk about it and deal with it in an appropriate way. Family, which used to be just a nuclear family concept, has evolved immensely. We have single parent families. We have same-sex parent families. We have divorced and reblended families. And now we have families of genetic half-sibs that can connect with each other. And we really do, those of us who are connected, feel like very much like a family. We share family events with each other. We help people through difficult times and support each other through illnesses and deaths of relatives as well. My parents kept secrets. My biological father, there's no way to really justify what he did, but for me to hold grudges against them, anger as a response to this is, in my sense, is really not appropriate. I love the family, this new family that I have, and I appreciate the sense of what everybody did was what they thought was, quote, for the best, even though ethically you really can't justify what my donor parent did. You can get very boring stuff. Gee, I'm 100% Ashkenazi. Well, I already knew that. Or some things can be amazingly surprising. And my take on things is when life surprises you, embrace the surprise, go with it, accept it, explore all of what you can gain out of that. And having been left as the only person left in my family, I have a whole new family now after 2 years. We all lived in the Philadelphia area. We could have connected with each other. There were connections and near misses that a number of us have had with each other. You don't want to burn any bridges before you even have a chance to build or cross them. So be nice. So should you do this or not? If you're, for those of you who are on the fence or thinking about sending in your 23andMe or whatever, ethnicity, you will probably be bored, but you might be pleasantly surprised or learn something new. Again, go for those big numbers. If it tells you that you are 2% Swiss, don't book that, that heritage tour to Basel just for that reason. Still probably a great place to go visit, but not for that reason. If you want to build your family tree, you want to find out about more relatives, this is not the place to start. You should do your research first. Talk to your parents if they're still alive. Talk to aunts and uncles who are still alive, cousins. Fill in as much as you can, and you will often learn that there might be gaps. An aunt might tell you, there's another cousin out there who we think might be there, but we don't know whatever happened to her, who she is, or what's going on. And when you do this family tree stuff, when you get messages from 23andMe and Ancestry, most of them are distant relatives. I get something every 2 weeks from Ancestry.com telling me that they found new relatives, and they're almost entirely, third to fifth cousins. It's interesting because they live all over the world, but I don't know how to fit them in, and I really can't take the effort. I know there are people who do connect with all of these people and triangulate and fit them together, and that's wonderful for them, but that's not my thing. If you're thinking of this test to know, do I have genetic risk for these diseases? Please don't do the test for that reason. If you do the test and you find something out about this regard, Don't either be inappropriately reassured that you're not at risk, and don't start panicking that you have something that puts you at risk. Talk to your doctor about it, and talk to a medical geneticist about it. This is useful for people who have been adopted, who are looking for their birth parents, or certainly for half brothers or sisters or cousins, etc. People who know they've been donor conceived, who are looking for half siblings out there, and sometimes even donors, people who served as donors, for these fertility clinics in the past, who are looking to see if they have any children out there. Even though they originally thought that they were going to be anonymous, nowadays they think, well, maybe I shouldn't be anonymous anymore. So other lessons that I learned, we've got so many doctors in the family. Is there such a thing as a doctor gene? I don't know, and frankly, I don't care. Everything changes and nothing changes. All of a sudden, overnight, I wasn't the person who I thought I was, but then again, I really was. I'm the same me who had all the same life experiences, all of the connections, all of the things that I've accomplished, all of the dreams that I've had, many of which I've fulfilled, and others which I'm still working on. I think about it like a tree in the forest. There has been a big forest fire, and all of a sudden that tree has not been damaged, but everything around it has. Is it the same tree? Yes, it is. But all of a sudden the sun for the first time comes in at a different angle. The squirrels, which used to hop onto its branches from adjacent trees, can't do that anymore. The birds nest differently. So it's the same tree, but it's a different tree. And I feel that, I'm the same person, but a different person in that regard. And of course, I was this miracle baby. Oh my God, I'm no longer a miracle. You know what? That's okay. But frankly, I still think I'm half a miracle. And to be really frank, and I really do believe this, every single one of us isn't truly a miracle of a human being. So on that note, I thank you and thank the Library Foundation of Needham for this opportunity. And I will take questions at this. I can see that there are a lot of them that are in the chat.
Yeah, Gail, I have a few here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Why don't I give you some?
I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Okay.
That's awesome. Hold on. Just 1 second. Now I need to find the questions again. Okay. Hold on. Gil, thank you. The talk was fabulous.
Thank you.
And I get the chills when I talk to you about this topic. And I'm sure others feel the same way. And just a minute correction, it's just the Friends of the Library that are sponsoring this. It's just slightly different organization.
Oh, did I say foundation? I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, but that's okay. They're a wonderful organization as well that help the programming the library. It takes a village. So the first question that came in was, Gil, how does epigenetics control or interact with DNA?
Oh boy, yeah, I saw that. That's from Terry, who's one of my half brothers. It's complicated. I didn't want to get into all of that. Epigenetics is things that happen to a person during their lifetime can affect whether DNA is expressed. So the DNA is there, which can lead to making the proteins, or it can control the making of that protein or other proteins. And what happens is the epigenetics sort of controls or blocks those signals. And in fact, this is one of the things that can actually be passed down from one parent to the next generation. So they know, for instance, from epigenetics, that if somebody was in during a wartime, there was starvation, and they went through that their children are more likely to be obese, not because of any genes that lead to obesity, but because there's something in there that expresses the building up of wanting to put on more weight to be safe, lest there be another famine. And there's lots of examples of that, and it's really much beyond that, as much of a simple explanation as I can give.
Okay.
I don't want to go
Right.
through that, but thanks for asking, Jen.
And from Michelle, is it possible that your parents didn't know that the sperm wasn't your father's?
This is, I really do not know. This is, I use an analogy from Hamilton, which is, I wish I could have been there in the room where it happened. Actually, I was technically, but I was basically just at most one cell at the time. I really don't know. And talking with the Sibs about this is one of the great questions that we have. A couple of the youngest of the Sibs actually did grow up knowing that they were donor conceived. Their parents had told them that, but they had no idea that who their donor was, and the fact that he had donated, and all of a sudden they would be a member of this very large family.
Okay, couple more, we have several more actually. So your sister was, just a clarification, but your sister was biologically from your mom and dad who raised you, or not?
No, she had been.
Yeah.
Well, the story is that I found out is my parents who had struggled with this infertility and had no, were very, sad about it as they saw, the families of their cousins growing. They were living in Philadelphia. They left Philadelphia for a year. They went down to the Carolinas. They lived there for a year. My mother, while she was there, among people she didn't know, apparently used graduated pillows to simulate a pregnancy in public. They had the baby, or they got the baby. I'm not sure of all the details of the adoption. And they came back to Philadelphia and said, look, we have a baby. And apparently, my cousins knew about this. And it was kind of a wink and a smile of a sham that went on with that.
Thank you. So Rebecca said, do you have thoughts about how we should govern the number of children that a donor could spawn?
Yeah, well, the thing is, we're finding out all these stories now, and most of the stories that we're hearing are when the in vitro fertilization clinics opened in the 80s. And now when we're hearing stories about this sort of thing, even with these donor registries, women who decide they want to have a child on their own, be a single parent, and they send off to get these the sperm sent to them. This whole thing about people who are parents of so many children, they're starting to regulate this now. But it's very weakly done because there are rules in certain states, and you can father 10 children in Texas if that's the limit there, and just go to Ohio and do 10 more there. So there needs to be, in my opinion, some national coordination on the regulation of this. There are very few places where there actually is. I think Indiana is one of those places where there has been legislation limiting this.
Let's see. I just want to. I think this is a reference to one of the earlier questions. Mark said, "I knew that I was donor conceived." Was that one?
Okay, so Mark Weinstein is one of my half brothers. I'm wondering, Mark, is there any way I can, you can unmute.
just ask Mark to unmute.
Okay.
If you
Can you hear me?
speak, we'll see you. Yeah. Yes.
I don't know if you noticed the similarity. Do we look like we're brothers?
That's yeah.
I found out through one of my aunts when I was in my 30s. It was a lot of my sips have heard this story before, but I was on a quest to find out who my father was because my parents were divorced when I was an infant, and I never had any contact with the man who I thought was my father at that time, not knowing that I was a product of artificial insemination. And I actually wound up meeting this guy, thinking he was my father. And like Gil, the origins of my birth had been this big family secret. So my mother was the oldest of 4 sisters. And so you can imagine the panic when I started meeting with this guy, who I thought was my father, they all thinking that he may spill the secret. So they all started getting really nervous, and I won't go through the whole story, but at one point, one of my aunts in a conversation with my wife said, well, there is a secret. She admitted it, and I'll tell Mark, but only alone and privately. And she told me, and I was in my mid-30s at the time, was married, had a couple kids.
Thank you.
I think one of the, thanks a lot, Mark, for sharing that. I think one of the themes among the family members is that every one of us has a different story, but we really have, in many ways, very similar stories of, discovering a family secret, working it out. It's like those few standing trees in the forest. They're all connected in some way, but they're still all different trees and different people. I see our newest brother here. Steve, do you want to say anything? Steve Yaffe, can I pick on you?
Yeah, let me just unmute there. I found out literally 2 months ago, August 31st, and I found out because of a phone call from Gil. And who, by the way, handled it perfectly. The combination of being very delicate about it, but coming right to the point. Initially, I imagine that's a difficult thing to do, is to break the news to somebody. But it's been a wonderful, positive experience for me so far. I was never a Facebook guy. This caused me to go on. I follow what's going on in the group. I participate from time to time. Still learning a lot, and I want to learn more. I'm actually going to meet 2 of the SIBs. I live in Florida, so I'm meeting one of them later this month, Mark, as a matter of fact, and then Larry Bruck one time in December. I'm looking forward to that, June 2021 reunion. Hopefully all the dust settles from all of this craziness and we can get together. Be funny. I was joking. I was thinking with my wife, if we all go to this with masks and we're trying to identify everybody, look for common facial characteristics in the mouth, as you said, and the nose and the ear, and we're all wearing masks, it would be kind of funny. But I am looking forward to it, however it goes. And, did it make me think that my whole previous life has been a lie or a sham? Absolutely not. It's just opened up some new doors. So I'm happy about it.
Should we take one more
Do you
question?
want to go back to questions? Yeah.
Yeah, how about one more and then move towards closing. This is a little bigger one. Can you explain why you trust the data for finding siblings, but not for medical risk? I'm asking as someone who is found to have sibling through Ancestry, which has actually been wonderful.
I'm not saying don't trust the information. I'm saying when you find out that you have a new relative, it's entirely up to you what you want to do with that. whether you want things like that to change your life or not. You can ignore it. You can go and connect and do anything you want with that. The data that comes from the medical testing, all it is data. It's not, none of it, almost none of it anyway, of the things that they test for is going to predict what's going to happen to you. So for instance, I found out when I did the medical testing, I have one of the variants of the ApoE gene that puts me at increased risk for developing late onset dementia. They say the risk is 20 to 30%. So the good news is that my risk is 70 to 80% that I won't develop dementia. And, you know, people freak out over things like this, or people get inappropriately reassured about things like this. It's just one piece of information. And in terms of what you do about it, you really need to go through the appropriate medical channels to work on your scheme for, so if, for instance, in my case, if there's an increased risk for dementia, I try to eat well, I try to exercise, I try to stimulate my brain with new things. Those will further reduce my risk, et cetera.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I want to thank you on behalf of the Friends of the Library, Gil, and the audience for coming and asking. There are actually several more questions. Maybe we'll have a chance to, I don't know if there's a way we can respond to them in offline or not.
What I can do, is there some way to save the chat?
Chat will be saved, and we can certainly see what we can do to
yeah.
questions
If,
answered.
anybody who I can identify, I will go through the chat and I will do as much as I can, contact them and try to answer their questions.
Do you want to take a minute and introduce
Thank you.
yourself?
Thank you very much. And
Can I take one
sorry,
more
go ahead.
minute and
Sure.
introduce, because I do have other SIBs here, and just to acknowledge them. Marcy, I don't know, Marcy, do you just want to
if you maybe unmute, and
really
then the
quickly
picture will show
unmute
up.
and say hi?
All siblings.
Yeah,
Hi,
of all
everyone.
siblings who are there, you can unmute. Larry was number 29, and he was one of the most enthusiastic of the SIBs when he found out. Larry grew up, excuse me if I'm telling this wrong, Larry grew up in a family where his father died very young of complications of diabetes, and everybody on his father's side of the family had severe diabetes with complications. And he grew up as an only child, and his sort of two regrets, so to speak, growing up was, one, he was worried about developing diabetes, and two, he was an only child. So when he found out that his father was not his biological father, and he didn't have to worry about getting his hemoglobin A1C checked every 6 months, and he all of a sudden now had 30 new SIBs, he was really thrilled and jumped right in.
And by the way, that's
Rhina.
100% accurate.
Huh?
That's 100% accurate.
Good. Bryna, are you there? Can you say hi?
Hi.
I don't. Okay. Okay.
There. I'm here.
We can't hear you, Brian. I'm going to move on with until you can
Yeah.
fix.
Wait, I see her. She's waiting.
Okay.
Speak loud.
Okay. Can you speak louder, Brian, and just say hi?
Yeah, hi,
Oh,
hi.
my video stopped working.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me? Hi.
Bryna is the person who I talked to originally, and is kind of the unofficial CEO of our group. And right next to her on the screen is Paul Mullen. Say hi, Paul.
Hey,
Paul's very interesting. Paul is one of in the minority who did not grow up Jewish. He's a very active member of his church in Wisconsin. Interestingly, though, in his job, he works with software developers in Tel Aviv. So he goes there several times a year, has learned Hebrew. Paul probably has been to Israel more times non-Jewish as all of the Jewish Sibs combined. Who else? Dina, she was the one sitting next to me.
Hi there.
Wow.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, OBGYN in New York City. Jim was the one who asked the question about the
epigenetics.
Epigenetics. Hi. Jim is one of the world's experts on entrepreneurism. So if you ever want to start your own business, you might call me and I'll connect you with him. Brian, Heidi, are you there?
I think I saw her earlier. I don't know if she's.
She might have said. It's interesting. One of the things is that we have some families in which there are multiple Sibs who are all full Sibs. And we actually have two families with sisters, one of which is named Gail and one of which is named Heidi. So that's kind of a crazy thing. And the other person I want to point out is Daniel Gazelowitz. Can you wave hi to everybody? Now, Daniel is not a Sib. Daniel, you still around?
Yeah.
I'm here.
Hi. So Daniel is not a Sib, but Daniel is an honorary Sib. He is a cousin. And actually, when this whole thing started, when there were only 3 or 4 people who found out that they were half Sibs and had no idea what was going on, it was Daniel as a cousin who said, I've got all of these cousins and they're all half Sibs and what's going on? And he was able to triangulate the connections and actually make the definitive identification of who our biological father was. So we owe a lot to you, Daniel, for helping us out. I think I've gotten everybody. I don't
All right.
know.
So it's great. Thank you so much, Gil. Just a quick announcement from me. There are a couple programs coming up in the new year that are also sponsored by the Friends of the Library. There's one called about the Oxford English Dictionary, the famous Oxford English Dictionary. One of the senior executives from Oxford University Press will discuss what it takes to keep that dictionary current and some fun stories about it. That's the 24th of January. And the following week, the 31st, we're going to have Ruth Margolin, who's an expert, and we'll talk about the art of crossword puzzle construction. So a lot to look forward to in the new year. I thank you all for joining. It's a little tricky on Zoom, but you're all good sports. And Gil, I don't know, Margie, if you want to wave someplace, Margie Brodsky is all part of this story as well. And we thank you.